Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. I will be taking your calls throughout the show live at 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. Joining me today, I have a guest. Not actually sure at this point what time he will be coming on board, but his name is Scott McNeely. He is the former CEO and co-founder of Sun Microsystems, and he has some very interesting perspectives on what's going on in Silicon Valley, California. So we will be talking with Scott later in the program. Just having some problems logging on to some of my websites, so hopefully I'll get that information to you after the next break. Anyway, we're getting some follow-through today in the oil market to yesterday's rally. Oil's up better than $2 a barrel right now. We're now trading at over $97. As I said yesterday, I do expect the move in oil to carry it up through $100 a barrel, maybe up to around 102, 103, before I would expect a little bit of overhead resistance at that level. But I don't believe that that will hold the market for long, but I think there will be a pause up there, maybe a little bit of a pullback. Metals continue to be strong. Gold is up over $10 again today. Silver is at a new 30-year high for New York trading hours. It hasn't eclipsed the peak that we had overnight on Monday before the U.S. market opened, but we are now trading at the highest price when the U.S. was not in a holiday. We are at, I think, spot silver is around $32.60 per ounce, moving in on the $33 level. The dollar continues to be weak, and I mentioned yesterday that this is very significant because we're getting all this global tension, and we are not getting a flight to quality rally in the dollar. And I said yesterday that, well, if the dollar's not going to rally on this turmoil, then it's going to sell off, and that is precisely what it's doing. The dollar is down across the board today, particularly if you look at it against some of the European currencies like the euro, the Swedish krona, the Swiss franc. In fact, the Swiss franc was very strong yesterday against the dollar. Even the British pound. The British pound is getting close to 162, and if you look at a chart, the pound against the dollar, the pound really looks to me like it's also about to break out. And, one of the big differences between the way Britain is dealing with its problems and the way the U.S. is there actually are some cuts going on in Britain. They are moving more towards the austerity model than the stimulus model. And I think we're very close to a breakout on the British pound. If we could just get a little bit higher in the pound, then I think the next resistance area will be around the 170 level. Once we get, I think, above 162 or 161.5, then we have a run up to 170. And if we break through 170, you can see the British pound rising all the way back up to 2-1 against the dollar. Now, I wouldn't expect that to happen unless we have an overall breakdown in the value of the dollar index. So I don't think you're going to see the British pound moving anywhere near $2 unless you're also seeing a simultaneous breakdown in the U.S. dollar against the euro, against the yen, against the Aussie, against the Canadian, against a host of other currencies. But if you look at that chart pattern, it does look very strong, and it does suggest more weakness in the U.S. dollar. And it shows you if the dollar is weakening even against the pound, because they've got a lot of problems in Great Britain. It's one of the regions we don't even have any exposure to the UK really in our portfolios at all at Euro Pacific Capital. So it's been one of the countries that we've been ignoring because Britain has many of the same problems that we have in the United States, just on a smaller scale. But the fact that the dollar is even weakening against the pound sterling shows you how weak the fundamentals are for the U.S. dollar and the fact that it's going down. Now, the stock market continues to go down. You remember I mentioned yesterday during the show that I thought the stock market would continue to get weak, and it really sold off later in the day. I think when we were doing the show yesterday, the Dow was only down about 70, 80 points. I think intraday it did go down over 200 points. It didn't close down that low. I think it closed down, about 150 or 160 points. It's now down another 55 points. So I believe we're in the vicinity of yesterday's lows. If not, we are already taking out yesterday's lows. Let me take a look. Yeah, we are trading below yesterday's lows on the stock market. So, and as I said yesterday, I think there has been some technical damage done to the market. I do expect some more weakness. I said I thought the Dow would go below 1,200. Right now we're at 12,150, so about another 150 points to go. I think maybe we can pull back as low as 11,800 and still be in this uptrend. And I do think, as I said before, that U.S. stocks will stay in an uptrend in the U.S. dollar. But I do not believe that they're in an uptrend against gold or against other currencies. In fact, I think the only reason that the stock market is not going to fall dramatically is because the dollar will fall even more dramatically, and it makes it difficult to really appreciate just how weak the U.S. stock market is when you're measuring it with something that is inherently weaker. The gold stocks, they continue to move up, but still lagging behind the metals. I had thought at some time ago that maybe the gold stocks were going to be leading the metals, but I guess that was premature because here it seems that silver has broken out to a new high. The price of gold looks like it might make a new high again before the gold stocks, but the gold stocks have just broken out of their short-term downtrend. If you look at the Huey index, I think the chart looks very strong, and I think it argues very well for a retest of the highs, which is the high for the index was back in December of 2010. We got as high as 598, so almost 600 on a Huey. And right now we're just below 560, so about 40 points to go to make a new high. I expect that to happen. And again, this is not the same pattern we had when the market was selling off in 2008, where everything went down. Normal, stocks are going down. Dow, S&P type stocks are going down, but gold stocks are rising. In fact, gold to me looks like it's very close to breaking through a new all-time record high. We only have about the high was maybe only about another $10 or $20 to go to make a new record on the price of gold. We'll take out a triple top. You have a triple top in the gold chart that goes back to November of 2010, November 12th, December 3rd, and January 7th form the triple top. And triple tops rarely hold. In fact, they're very unreliable. If people think a triple top means that the high is in, more likely than not, when you do get a triple top, that it doesn't hold for long. And I think that's going to be the case here with this precious metals rally. But again, everybody who talks about it in the media, they want to look at the fact that gold is rising or silver is rising or oil is rising and kind of lay the blame on Libya or other tensions in emerging markets. No doubt that these tensions provide more bullish news for the bull market, more fuel for the bull market. But if we didn't have an underlying bull market, if dollars and other currencies weren't so weak, you wouldn't be seeing this type of reaction. This is simply the long-term trend playing out, and the news is certainly helping to feed those trends, but it is not the cause. It is not the reason. The reason that gold and silver are so strong, the reason that oil is so strong, the reason that commodities are so strong is because the dollar and other currencies are weak. Why are they weak? Because central banks are printing them to artificially stimulate their economies, and the only thing they stimulate is inflation. Anyway, don't go away. We will be back with more of the Peter Schiff Show after this commercial. Look at this rally in precious metals now. Now we're up about $15 in gold. Silver's now up 50 cents on the day. So the rally is gathering steam as we speak. Now, I had some interesting sound that I wanted to play. The first cut is from CNN yesterday. Carol Castillo. These are her warnings about how corporate America is about to win in Wisconsin and what this means. It's interesting to see the spin that is being put on what's happening in Wisconsin right now. Play this sound, cut number one.
Corporate America is about to win big time. Mary Kay Henry is the president of the Service Employees International Union.
There's been a coordinated campaign for the last 30 years to undermine the American middle class by weakening the power of workers to be able to collectively bargain to raise their wages.
Henry says corporate America save themselves money and wages by lining the pockets of Republicans running for statewide offices. According to followthemoney.org, in the 2009-2010 election cycle, business interests donated $878 million to candidates running for governor and other statewide offices across the country. That includes hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations for Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin and John Kasich of Ohio.
Anyway, so the interesting thing here, I think we got to try to keep these clips shorter. I think a lot of that, we didn't need to hear quite so much of that. But the interesting point is that they're saying that we're going to undermine workers by, cutting back the pay of these government workers. Well, who do they think is paying their salaries? The alternative to reductions in the pay of government workers is reductions in the pay of private sector workers. Because if we are going to continue to pay civil servants, government employees at the rate we are, we have to keep raising taxes on the private sector workers who are footing the bill. And that is the same thing as a pay cut. So why aren't they looking at the perspective of the taxpayers, the vast majority of which is not corporate America, are not the rich, but middle-class working Americans that happen to be working in the private sector? Why should they be asked to take pay cut after pay cut after pay cut so that they can finance the much higher pay being provided to government workers? I mean, that is the real issue here. Also, one of the things that bothers me a lot in the media is the talk about how we can't afford to cut the deficit right now because the economy is in so much trouble, the economy is weak, and that if we cut the deficit, that we're going to undermine the recovery. Therefore, we need to keep the deficits going, because if we cut back on government spending, we're going to hurt jobs, we're going to hurt the economy. It's actually the exact opposite. Here's some sound from this is from the editor of the Washington Post, who was on MSNBC trying to explain why cutting the deficit is dangerous for the economy. Play that. It's cut number 2.
What are we worried about in the country? Well, we got 9% unemployment. Lots of working middle-class people have stagnating incomes. Lots of working-class kids can't afford college. A lot of communities around this country are going broke. But what are we talking about in Washington? Only 2 things, and they're really overlapping things. One is cutting programs, including programs to help some of the people who are suffering, and the other is cutting the deficit. So you've got the Tea Party over here cutting programs, and Washington Elite Opinion saying, if we're not focused only on the long-term deficit, we're not serious. Well, what about all these other problems? And I think the Tea Party can claim some victory in shifting the whole discussion away from a lot of problems that I at least think we ought to be talking about.
Yeah, so the bottom line here is they're talking about how we have to keep the deficits going because we have all this unemployment, and so we can't cut programs that are creating jobs or stimulating the economy. But the reality is those programs don't stimulate anything, but the cost of paying for them is stifling the economy. People don't seem to understand that the deficits themselves are the reason that the economy is so weak. The reason the economy is weak is because the government is robbing it of the resources it needs to grow. Those resources are being diverted from productive uses in the private economy to unproductive uses through the public sector, and that is what we have to bring to an end. We have to stop the government spending in order to liberate the economy and enable it to grow. People who are saying that, oh no, we can't afford to make these cuts now, we can't, the cuts can't be too big to endanger the recovery, they can't be big enough. The more government spending we cut, the stronger the economy is going to be. The problem is the cuts are too small. We're talking about such a small amount of reduction in the size of government that we're not going to get any economic growth because there's too much weight that is being left to burden the economy. And it's not just, unfortunately, the taxes. it's all the rules and all the regulations that are also adding to the drain on the economy. Anyway, I found out my guest is coming up at 10:35, so after the next commercial break, I'll see if I can squeeze in one caller before we take the guest. Lee is on the line from Atlanta, Georgia. Lee, you're on with Peter Schiff.
Hi, Lee. My question is, I believe the dollar is going to be completely crashing in the next few years, which will bring on hyperinflation. Personally, I have a decent position in physical precious metals, and my brokerage account has a lot of gold and silver mining companies.
Yeah, hopefully when you have physical precious metals, you mean actual bullion, not antique or rare coins.
Right, yeah, it's bullion.
Good.
And so what I'm thinking about doing is getting a loan from my bank, securing, using my stocks as security, and using the proceeds to buy more precious metals. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, why are you going to a bank? Your brokerage firm where you have your securities, you can't get a margin loan against your securities from your broker?
Well, I wasn't thinking about doing a margin loan. I was just thinking about getting a secured loan from my bank.
Yeah, well, generally, I mean, that's what a margin loan is, and generally you'll get much better terms if you borrow from your brokerage account than transfer the securities to your bank and getting a loan against them there. But, it's a very speculative thing to do, obviously, because if the value of the securities falls, you're going to be called on to put up more money, and if you don't, they're going to sell your stocks at a loss, and so, you could end up losing quite a bit of money if your timing is off. And even if your gold goes up, the stocks that you margin might go down. And so it's a risky strategy. Anyway, I could talk more about that later in the show, but I've got to go. We've got a commercial coming up, and then my guest coming up right after the half hour. So don't go away. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio. And joining me now is Scott McNeely, who's the co-founder of Sun Microsystems. And I believe he developed the Java programming language, and this goes way back. But he's also a confessed libertarian, and I think he has a very good perspective on what's going on in Silicon Valley, and can talk a little bit about, what is happening with the computer industry, the software industry here in the United States. Are we losing our edge to other countries that have potentially freer markets, that have fewer government regulations? What is the state of the technology industry here in the U.S., Scott, from your perspective?
Okay, so yes, I got your question, and that's a little bit overbroad, but the U.S. still is the leading supplier of computer technology, from microprocessors, operating systems, networking, and all the way through applications. And we are quite strong into even, the new areas of social networking, at least in our own country. Although, the real challenge is, where are the manufacturing jobs, where are the engineering jobs that are creating this next generation technology? And I think that and it's probably a good thing for the planet, has moved outside of the U.S. in some pretty significant ways. It does create some interesting challenges, for instance, for our Defense Department, because most of the product that they build, the networking equipment, the computers, and the products that they use to defend our country, all of them probably have some technology that's sourced, and some unique technology that's sourced out of places like China. So it's an interesting mixed bag, very different from say 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, what we've lost in the computer industry is the actual manufacturing of the equipment, the computers themselves, or any of the hardware that used to be made here in the United States is now mostly made abroad, and to the extent that we need it, we have to import it.
Well, yeah, a lot of the components are, and there's been a recent flap about these very rare metals that are used to do miniaturized product. China has a lot of those natural resources, and they actually can control the supply and actual production of a lot of equipment. That's a big deal. The other big issue is just if you look at the sheer number of English-speaking computer science engineers, there's a lot more of them in India and a lot more of them in China than there are in the United States. And they continue to crank out far more graduate degrees in science and technology than we do here in the U.S., which is going to create an interesting challenge for a balance of technology power down the road.
Why do you think that is? Because, we have so many kids enrolled in universities around the country. Why is it that more of them aren't moving into those fields?
Well, they are. Most of the H-1B visas and others who come in from are taking technology degrees. I don't know. I think there's
I'm talking about native-born Americans. I mean, why aren't the American kids who are going to American high schools when they go to university, why aren't they on that path? Why aren't they going towards more computer-oriented majors?
That's a strange one for me. Obviously, I value engineering and technology and academics pretty aggressively, given that I was in a company that hired over 235,000 employees while I was there and was one of the top 40 R&D spenders on the planet. And I think that's ultimately a very core set of of skills that this country needs to have. But I don't see that. A lot of people think I work my kids too hard. Hey, they need a light. They need to. I guess we're down Maslow's hierarchy to the point where moving from walking to being on a bike to being on a car to hey, I don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah, I can answer my own question. I think it's a real shame, but it has to do with government policy of guaranteed student loans. Since governments guarantee loans, it doesn't really matter whether you major in computer science or art history or philosophy or sociology. You're going to get the same guarantees. So there is no relevance as far as can the person who gets this degree earn enough money to pay it back? Nobody cares. So since kids can get the same amount of money to go for a computer science or program degree as they can for a sociology degree, and since sociology classes are a lot easier and it's a lot, you can have a lot more fun if you take a liberal arts major. It doesn't interfere with your partying and your beer drinking. I think a lot of young kids who really can't make these decisions, take all that government money and take the easier major, and they don't opt for these. It's the kids that are coming in from abroad that are spending their own money that are making more practical decisions on what majors to pursue.
I don't disagree with that at all, but I believe ultimately that's a two-biological parent failure. I don't believe it's a village that raises a child. I think it's two biological parents. And somehow, some way, the biological parents were not able to instill with the kids what their own choices create. There's something that's more insidious too, with respect to what the government has done. By taking over the loan program, they've actually provided incentives for you to default or not pay off your loan or pay it off over a longer period of time if you go into government service, which I think sounds really wonderful up front, but what it's really doing is trying to engage more workers into the public sector, which is highly unionized, and actually creates more of a, as a libertarian, I don't want to see more people going into government. I want to see fewer going into government and more people going into private sector. And I'd like to see the government get out of the business of insurance and redistribution and fair outcomes.
How much have you seen the government's involvement, grow in the computer industry since, your early involvement in Sun Microsystems? Is it? Can you see a meaningful difference in the amount of government and regulation that inhibits businesses from growing?
I see it trying, and I think there are one of the reasons it has been a very successful industry is that it is one of the few major industries that is not dominated by collective bargaining. It is one where the government has not. When you move at the speed of Congress, it's hard to keep up with Moore's Law. So I think we've been able to outrun the legislators in some fairly successful ways. You see them pushing for things like net neutrality, which is a classic government statement of something that sounds really good, but is actually quite insidious and creates some very, very wrong financial incentives.
Look at even what's happened with one industry in telecommunications, the cellular phone industry. Imagine. I think when the cell phone industry first got off the ground, I remember my first cell phones. I think they were pretty much all made in the U.S., and now none of them are made here. Well,
manufacturing is a big issue, and when you set a minimum wage that is far above, and you set regulations that other people are not abiding by, and you're playing by your own set of rules with the global markets now. It's just very, very difficult. Isn't it a
crime? We've got millions of unemployed Americans, yet we're buying millions and millions of cell phones a year, and we don't make any of them. Not a one. I mean, how can the United States have a 0% of the market in an industry that dynamic, that everybody in the planet is buying these phones, and we don't make any of them, and yet we have millions of people who are unemployed?
Well, I think if you ask a lot of those unemployed folks, would they like a manufacturing job at some salary? I think probably a lot of them would say yes, but I think a lot of them would say no. I like my unemployment benefits too.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, we've created a culture in this country where it's more lucrative to stay unemployed than to get a job. But what we need to do is we need to take those alternatives away. We need to stop punishing businesses for creating jobs, and we need to stop rewarding employees for not accepting jobs.
I hear that.
Anyway, don't go away. I want to talk after the break about what you're doing now and your new nonprofit. So don't go away. This is Peter Schiff with Scott McNeely on SchiffRadio.com. Hey everybody, this is Peter Schiff with my guest, Scott McNeely, the co-founder of Sun Microsystems. And Scott, when you listen to President Obama speaking now, he's constantly talking about the need to innovate and how we have to innovate to compete. But he wants the government deciding which innovations merit investment, whether it's clean technology or green energy or high-speed rail. And, you were really at the ground zero of the information technology, computer revolution. Did the government play any part in that innovation? And do you think the government should be in the business at all of trying to encourage innovation through government spending?
I think the government did add, to be fair, and I'm not I'm a raging capitalist, but very strong libertarian from that perspective. A lot of the technologies that we use to get started at Sun were done through R&D grants through universities, where the technology was made open and available to the world to grab and run. So some basic research was done with DARPA grants, Defense Department grants for some of the work that was early Unix technology that we used inside of our Sun products. So, yeah, they can add some value there, but certainly they left it to the academic world to decide where to do that research in some areas. So, but the Defense Department aimed them also a little bit, so they can add value, but I don't think they should be involved in the private sector as much as they are.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that some of that earlier technology that came as a result of these grants, you think it would have come anyway if there was no government grant? You think if the government had left the money in the private sector instead of taking it and then spending it, you think these innovations would have developed even absent that government involvement?
Potentially, it's always hard to go back and rerun the model. I think if you lower taxes and let the private sector do the work, you're probably going to... I mean, the famous example is the government invented a programming language called Ada and declared that the standard, and nobody ever used it. Nobody's ever heard of it. So they're far more likely to guess wrong if they pick standards. But providing an environment of investment for R&D is a good thing. It just gets... when the Defense Department... When the Defense Department's aiming at, that's a good thing. Because that's a national role for the government, but they tend to go in wrong directions.
Yeah, the public never really sees the mistakes; it only sees the successes. So you don't know how much money was blown in order to get something that works. And of course, when it comes to government, it's always the scene, right? You can see the government spent some money and you can see the results, but what you don't see is what wasn't developed, what innovations didn't take place because the government took that money out of the private sector in the first place. And though there it's much harder to know what we lost because the government provided us with something. But I wanted to talk to you about what you're doing now with, how do you pronounce it? Is it Curriki?
Curriki, exactly.
Curriki.
C-U-R-R as in curriculum and I-K-I as in wiki.
All right, and so what is this organization? What's the goal here?
Well, education is a big issue, and there's a lot of things that cause our poor success rates in educating. A lot of it is goal setting. We try to make everybody the next Jack Welch or Barack Obama in our education system when not everybody's going to do that. There's obviously home values and issues, the family issues that are causing problems. There's a lot of structural issues, lack of choice. The one area I decided to work on is curriculum, and we spend $8 to $15 billion a year on things like third grade math textbooks that are no different than the ones you and I learned on